Hello everyone, Mr. Love here. I'm in my home shop today. We're just going to check out a couple different types of air tools and battery tools and electrical tools. Ones that you'll find in most shops that you'll have to use on a daily basis most times. So let's get started. So first of all, safety first. Always make sure you have on a good pair of safety glasses. For most of this stuff it's going to be a little noisier, like cut-off wheels, grinders, saws, impacts. So if you're using any of them, make sure you have on hearing protection, either earplugs or earmuffs. I got earplugs in, so I'm good to go. Got my safety glasses on. So first of all, we're just going to do an air cutoff tool. So a couple things before we ever hook the air to these. You always want to check everything out. Always make sure the proper guard's on there. Don't take off guards and dispose of them. They're on there for a reason. Especially on cutoff tools and grinders and stuff. You can see that the guard pivots around it. That's so you can angle the sparks the way you want them to go. If you didn't have a guard on there, not only while you're cutting it could kick back and cut your hand, but also the sparks will be flying back at you, either going on your hand or catching your clothing on fire. So always make sure the guards are on there the way they're supposed to be. Another thing you want to do before you hook this up is spin the wheel around, check that out, make sure there's no nicks or anything in there. If there's any nicks in the wheel as you're cutting, that wheel could explode on you. Either go into your eye or face, or go flying across the shop into somebody else's. So always make sure that's in good shape. Okay, so we're almost ready to go here. So each day before you use the air tool, give it a little shot of oil. Use air tool oil or automatic transmission fluid, something like that. This is regular air tool oil here. So just put a little bit down in the nipple there. Then just squeeze the trigger, let it fall down in there. Don't tip it upside down, otherwise it'll drip out on you. Okay, so now we're ready to hook this to the air. So the air quick connect, just pull back on the collar here, and it releases the little balls inside there. Those little balls, when this is pushed on there, lock around this collar right here so it doesn't pop out on you. So pull that back, the little balls will fall down in. You can push it right on there. If you wanted to release it at any time, just pull back on the collar, it'll pop right off for you. Okay, so we got that on there. Got the guard where we want it. Has a little safety notch on most triggers on these, just so you don't set it down and have it go off on you. So you got to depress that little safety latch, safety trigger, and it's ready to go. So we'll just cut a little piece of PVC here, but they're mostly made for cutting metal, stuff like that, but we'll just use PVC today because it's a little faster and a little easier. Okay, so just take your guard, put it up to where you want to cut at, just squeeze the trigger and let the blade do all the work. Don't hog it into it. It will damage the blade and it won't work as good. Just let the blade do all the work. Let the tool do the work for you. Okay, so we got it cut off fairly straight. You'll see we have some debris left on the edges, a little sharp edge on there. If this was metal or something, that sharp edge could cut you. So make sure you take a file or a grinder to it when you're done to grind it off so nobody gets cut on it. Okay, so that's the air cut off. Next we have two different die grinders. These are the same tool basically, except this one's a straight one, this one's a 90-degree one. We'll show you this one first. This one here has a little surfacing wheel in there, a little roll lock wheel. So to change these out, it's very simple. You just twist that off. Has a little half turn threads on there. So you just change out the new one. These are about 50 cents a piece to 75 cents a piece. So, take good care of them. Don't waste them. Use them all the way up. So same idea with this one. We're going to give it a little shot of oil in there. Squeeze the trigger. Hook it to our air, and we're ready to go. So this one here, we're going to use just to polish up metal, resurface and stuff. See my workbench is a little dirty right here. It's got some grease wedged in there. So we can polish it up nice with that. So this works very good for cleaning, you know, off gaskets, stuff like that. And our straight die grinder here, give it a little shot of oil, squeeze the trigger. So in this die grinder here, we got an actual die grinding tip on it. This is carbide steel, very strong steel, very hard, very aggressive. This you would use to grind down a piece of metal or other material that you have. We'll just use this piece of PVC since it's sitting here. But this die grinder here, if you wanted to smooth something out or put a groove into something, you'd take the die grinder. You see it's very aggressive. You put a groove into it right away just by touching it to it. So you can do that with steel. Obviously it'll take a little bit longer than the PVC. But, so, die grinder. Next we have an air impact gun. These you'll be using quite a bit on a daily basis, especially in a big shop. This is a 1/2-inch drive one. You'll see 3/8 ones. For what you guys do, you don't see those too much. It's mostly in automotive and stuff for the air ones. But you'll be using 1/2-inch ones, 3/4 ones, 1-inch ones, 1.5 if you're into like locomotives and stuff like that, or spline drive. But most of the time it'll just be 1/2-inch, 1-inch, or 3/4 of an inch. So the way an impact works, I have an old one here. You tear it apart. Basically it's just an air motor inside there. So air comes in the bottom of the gun here, travels up through. When you pull the trigger, lets the air come out and gets directed into the little port here. Actually give it a little shot of air. Should be able to get it to spin. So we get a little rotation there, but not too much. Like I said, it's not a good impact anymore. That's why I tore it apart. But if air blows in one side, it spins one direction. Air blows in the other side, it spins the reverse direction. That's how you get the forward and reverse out of it. So the more you squeeze the trigger, lets more air in, the faster this is going to spin around. So as that motor spins around, has this little hammer and end on there. That sits on there like so. So it spins around with that air motor. These little flyweights on there is what actually gives it the torque and impact motion. So as you're hammering on something, as it's deadheaded on a bolt or something, that's hammering back and forth, giving it more, like pounding it around. So it gives it more torque by pounding it as it's sitting there hammering. So pretty simple inside, neat idea, very effective. There's not much more to it. There's just the shaft and then just the hammers sit on there. And they just knock that shaft back and forth. That's why when you're sitting there on a bolt that won't come off or something, just hammering away at it, you can actually see it rock back and forth. That's just on the groove there, just rocking back and forth with these hammers. Okay, so the impact. Little shot of oil here. Squeeze the trigger. Hook it to our air. You can't really over oil these. You don't need a lot of oil, just a couple drops each day. If you over oil it, all it's going to do is come out the exhaust of the stuff and just make a mess all over your hands and clothing. So this impact here I've had for a long time. Probably, I don't know, since I was probably 14 or 15 probably. I keep this one at home because it's nice and quiet. Doesn't wake the neighbors or anything up. It's a pretty decent one. Has about 600 foot-pounds of torque, of nut-busting torque. Okay, so whenever we use an impact, we need to have an impact socket on it, not a chrome socket. So chrome socket's no good for this. As it's hammering back and forth, as we showed there, it'll split these sockets. Pieces will go flying off. So you want a nice impact socket. They're a little heavier wall, and they're actually made out of a little softer metal most of the time, so there's a little more wear to them, a little more give to it, so it won't crack on you. It'll wear before it cracks. So important thing with these is when a socket's on there, don't squeeze the trigger. Right now it's contained, nothing's on there, nothing's going to fly off. But if I have a socket on there and I squeeze the trigger, it could fly off on me. You see there's a little hog ring on the end of the impact here. You can see it split right there. So it's a little hard to get the sockets on sometimes if it's a good hog ring. That's what keeps the socket on there for you. So like this one's a pretty fresh one, so it's a little hard to get on. So you line it up to where it goes, then you might have to give it a little tap on a table or use your hand to tap it on there all the way. And once it's on there, then it's good to go. So remember, this is spinning around here, so you don't want to keep your fingers, tight inside there or something. You can, brace your hand underneath it to keep the socket from flying off. Just don't grab a hold of it, try to stop it. Smaller ones you could stop, but you're not going to stop 600 foot-pounds of torque. So spins around. You can see it gets a little wobbly there. I'll point it off in this direction. Don't try this at home. You can see it's a little unbalanced, flops around a little bit. So it could potentially fly off of there and hit someone. I'll show you with the universal joint here in a minute for it that it probably will. So I'm just going to use the vise here just to hold the other end of this for me as I run this bolt in. So always make sure you go in the right direction first. Remember, don't do what I do. Okay, so now we're in the right direction. Forward and reverse right here. Okay, going forward. Okay, so that's a lock nut there, so it goes on a little bit harder. It's made so it doesn't vibrate off going down the road or anything. So now I'll hammer on this and you might be able to see it rock back and forth a little bit. See, it pulled it out of there on me. So you can see it hammering back and forth. So now reversing it, comes right out. Impacts have the most amount of power in the first couple seconds of trigger pull. So you don't really need to sit there and hammer on something unless it's really tight. What it's recommended by Snap-on and stuff is to give it a few second burst at a time. Give it a little bit, count to 3 or 4. Count to 3 or 4 and let off. Do it again. Got a lot of power there, so it keeps coming out of our pipe. So if something comes out pretty hard, it's going to be hot. This is starting to warm up a little bit. It's not that hot. But if you're taking a stud off a truck or something, you probably wouldn't be able to grab it with your hands without burning your fingers. So always keep that in mind. Okay, so if you're going to use a universal on an impact, make sure it's an actual impact universal. I recommend Snap-on ones. The benefit to the Snap-on ones is they lock on nicely. They have a lock-in tab up here for the socket, and they don't pivot as much as some of the other ones do. So it's made to go at all angles on an impact. If you use just a regular universal joint, over to my toolbox here. You're there. So if you use a regular universal joint on an impact, you can see how much of an angle we could get with these. That's way too much for an impact. This would just fly off instantly. And if you used a chrome one on there, it would shatter. These little pins aren't made to hold up the torque of that magnitude. So always use an impact universal if you're going to use one. Try not to use one if you if you could get to it with just a straight shot. Always use a straight shot. You'll have more torque and it won't be as dangerous. But if you are going to use one, use it the proper way. Make sure the little locking tab here goes in the hole of the socket. Make sure it's on there good. You see there's another hole down here. Some impacts actually have it where you could put a pin through it. Usually on 3/4 and above, they have a spot where a pin could go through there, and then a little O-ring holds the pin in. But On here we don't have that, so we're going to put it on there. So we'll show you now what not to do. So we have our universal on there. Now if we hit the trigger, it starts flying around. It's going to fly off on us. You know, could potentially hit us in the face or damage something. It's definitely not good for the impact or for the socket and universal. So always use the tool the proper way. Like we talked about before, kind of use your hand on there. You know, just to steady it a little bit. If you're in a tight angle, just watch your face. Usually if you're on something, it's not going to fly off on you. When it is going to fly off is when that nut or bolt comes all the way out and there's no resistance on there anymore. That's when it's going to fly out and whack you in the face. So just be aware of that. Okay, there's a lot of other, basically anything that is a power tool can be made into an air tool. They have air tool drills, hacksaws, or sawzalls, stuff like that. Basically any tool you can think of, they have an air equivalent to it. Next we'll go into the battery ones. Battery ones, there's not too many safety things with the batteries. Just make sure they're in there all the way. Make sure it's a good fully charged battery. When it's on the charger, make sure it's not blinking the error code on the charger. So battery just slides off the bottom of this style, slides back on there. This is just a cheap Porta-Cable one. I use these on my road call kit for when I was working on trucks. This is actually a newer one that just came with a grinder or something that I had. Never actually used this one much, but it's not too bad of a drill. Power wise it's pretty good. Battery life's not the best. I usually prefer DeWalt and stuff. This one's an 18 volt one here. So we'll just go through the benefits of using a drill over other stuff. Okay, so with our drill here we got two different speeds. We got low speed, high speed. We have a chuck here. This is a speed chuck. So this chuck here is made for when I hold it. I hold it with my hand, squeeze the trigger. I go the one way, it tightens up. If I go the other way and hold it, it gets bigger. That way I can clamp down on a drill bit or a Phillips bit or whatever I'm putting in there. So I got just a little screwdriver Phillips bit in there. If you're gonna screw with one of these, put a screw in with one of these, I should say. Always have it in low speed. If you try to high speed screw in, you're going to just strip out the head of it. So here you see we have a little picture of a drill bit, plus we have this number index here. This number index is on there. It's kind of a slip clutch. I'll show you with a screw here. So just a piece of pine here. Just a standard drywall screw. So I'm going to screw this in. I have my slip clutch all the way down here, down to 2. You can see it won't even put the screw in all the way before it starts to slip internally. So I bump this up to a little medium there. I can put the screw in. So still it won't let me put that screw in all the way at that setting. So this is beneficial when you're putting something into plastic or reinstalling screws in a dash or something. You want to set this at kind of a medium torque there. That way you're not stripping out the screws or cracking plastic, anything like that. Split in wood. If I had this up in drill mode, I could just run the screw right in. You can see, it just spun down in there and it actually just snapped off in there. See, just stripped out. Oh. It actually didn't snap in there, but it won't let me go any deeper with it. Let's see if I had that in a lower setting. And make a new hole here. If I had that in a lower setting, set it at 22 here. So that'll let me put the screw in all the way, but it won't embed it down inside there or strip the hole out. So that's the benefit to using the slip clutch there. So when I'm in drill mode, and always use that for when you're drilling. but use the slip clutch for when you're putting in screws, stuff like that. So forward, reverse, right on the side. Push it one way, it's for forward. Push it the other way, it's for reverse. 2 speeds like we talked about. Whenever you're taking a screw in or out, make sure you're perfectly straight with it. If you're on any kind of an angle, all it's going to do is strip out the bit, strip out the screw. So you want to make sure you're nice and straight on it. Always put a little pressure in it, even if you're taking the screw out. Always put an inward pressure on the screw, and it'll stay in there and it won't strip out on you. Take our bit out here. For what you guys are doing, this one here is big and bulky, and it's not heavy duty enough to actually do anything major. So what I would recommend for you guys, just get some nice little DeWalt 12 volt ones. You could usually get a kit. They're not super cheap, but a couple $100 will get you a decent kit. I actually have multiple kits of these. I think I have 3 or 4 kits. I always kept one in my toolbox at home, one at work, and one in my road call box, and one in my personal car. So very nice. These are nice and lightweight, good power to them. This one here is just a regular screw bit attachment. I use this style here for taking screws out of dashes and stuff. Some dashes, they could have 20, 30 screws in them in a tractor or a heavy duty truck. So if you need to access something quick, if you're just using a hand screwdriver, you'd be there all day. So this one only has 1 speed, so it's made for just putting screws in and out, but it does have a slip clutch on it like the other one does. So all the way the one way, it doesn't slip as much. All the way the other way, it will slip on you. So run our screw in. See, it has a lot of power. We just split that board with it. If I turn it the other way, I have my slip clutch just like the other one. That way it doesn't split the board. So just a little screwdriver style. Here's another screwdriver style, but this one's an impact driver. So this, kind of like our air impact, has little hammers inside here. So as I'm hammering on something, as I'm torquing it in, doesn't go any farther, the little hammers start to vibrate and give me a little more torque. You see it just stripped out the screw there. You can hear it hammering. So forward and reverse, just like the other one. Very handy. I don't use this one too much. This is more made for wooden stuff. You can take these ones and put little bits inside them. So say you wanted to run something in with a nut driver, this would be a good one to do. A little 5/16 bit. You could run a nut in. You could use it on a little hose clamp. Something like that. Works perfect for that. Normal drill, same as the other drill. This is my favorite out of this kit. This is just a 3/8 impact, so this isn't going to get you out of a lot of jams. But 1/2-inch impacts, they're good for when you're in the shop or something. If you just need to run something off real quick. But the problem with the electric 1/2-inch impacts is they're so heavy and awkward and bulky. So usually I would just use an air gun, which has way more power and is a lot smaller and lighter. But if I had to do something up in a dash of a piece of equipment, I usually grab my little 3/8 impact here. Remember, always use a proper impact socket on it. These ones are actually little DeWalt sockets that came with it. Have a couple of these too. You can see this one's been used a lot. I love these little things for anything smaller. A 3/8 bolt or smaller, these are perfect for it. It has about 100 foot-pounds of torque. So we'll just put our little bolt in here. So you can hear it hammers. It's a regular impact. So works pretty good. This one's a little worn. You can see we were talking about the hog ring on the end of the other impact. This one's a little worn. So the socket just slides right off right now. I got to replace that. So if I had that on there and pulled the trigger, it'd get a little wild on me, might fall off. Yep, there it goes. So that's why it's important not to run any of these spinning tools with the bit in there when it's not attached to something else. Okay, now on to corded tools. So corded power tools, they're going to be pretty powerful. Some drills and stuff that I have, it's enough where if you're on top of a ladder and you're using one of these big 1/2-inch gear reduction ones and you're drilling through a joist or something and it catches, it'll actually spin you around up in the air right off the ladder. So always be aware of that with corded stuff. You get wound up in the cord pretty easily. It's not too much forgiveness to electrical motors. Remember, it's instant torque, not like air other engines or motors where it have to spool up a little bit. The electric motors have instant torque, so all the torque is there as soon as you pull the trigger. So always check your cord first. When you pull it out, make sure the tool that you're using is nice and dry. Make sure it's not soaked in oil. There was sparks and stuff inside here. If it had oil or grease on it, it could catch on fire. So make sure it's nice and clean. Make sure the cord's nice. If you're using something like this reciprocating saw here, put the blade in before you plug it in. Okay, so I got my blade in there. This one's a metal cutting blade, has fine teeth on it. So our cord looks good and everything. This is just a 2-prong tool, but if this is a 3-prong tool, make sure all the 3 prongs are on there. If it's missing a grounding plug and something shorts out internally, you could get electrocuted. So if it has 3 prongs on there, make sure all 3 prongs are functional and still attached. Okay, plug it in. So I squeeze the trigger and it reciprocates back and forth. That's why it's called a reciprocating saw. Some people call it a Sawzall, but that's just a brand name. It's a variable speed trigger, so if I touch it just a little bit, it goes slow. The farther I push it in, the faster it goes. So we're full speed. We'll just cut this little screw off since we have it in there. So when you're using a reciprocating saw, remember, let the blade do all the work, and also use the guard on there to support you. If I just head it out like this and I pull the trigger, it's going to pull my hands back and forth. But if I set that guard up against there, that little stop, you can see my hands didn't move back and forth at all. My arms didn't move at all. A little screw fell out there, so just screw that in real quick. So we got our metal blade on there. We'll cut through this screw here. So cut through it pretty quickly. Remember, it's nice and hot afterwards. You wouldn't want to touch your fingers to it. So unplug it. Pull your blade out so it fits in the case or wherever you put it away. Always make sure you wind up the cord properly. Okay, for a little hand grinder. Same idea as the cutoff wheel that we used with the air earlier. Has a guard and stuff on it. This one's actually a cutoff disc in here right now. If you wanted to put a grinding wheel on here, a resurfacing wheel, make sure you do that before you plug it in. We got it plugged in, got a little trigger here. Push the trigger up and engages it. If you push the trigger up and then push in on it, it locks on. If you want to unlock it, you just press the bottom of it and it unlocks out of there. Sometimes when people first start using these, it'll lock on them and they think they broke the tool. So if that happens, just push on the bottom of the trigger. So when you use one of these, when you're done cutting or grinding, whatever you're doing, make sure the wheel is stopped before you just throw it on the table. And set it on the table nicely. If I threw this down right now, it could damage the wheel. And like we talked about earlier, if it's any nick or anything in the wheel that you see, it could explode on you and embed it into your face or something. So, want to wait till it slows down, then set it down on the table. If I have it going and set it down, see, it could cut into the table, it could walk on me, cut my air hose up, it could destroy a bunch of stuff. So, always make sure it's stopped when you set it down. If you have to change out the blade for any reason, or disc, unplug it first. It has a little lock in the top of it here. You see it freewheels now. So if I push this button, it locks in. That way I can use a tool on there. I don't have to hold it with any special wrench or anything. I just use the tool on there to take that nut off. So do not press this button as it's spinning. It'll wear the little nub off on there. And it'd basically be junk. Then they're a pain to take on and off if you ever have to do it again. So wind up your cord when you're done. Put it back away where it belongs. Okay, next we have our chop saw here. So this is just another friction disc on here. Make sure it's unplugged if you ever have to change this out. Notches or anything out of it. If there's any big notches in there, like we said before, if we're cutting, it could explode on us. I'll show you guys a couple pictures in a minute of what happens when these explode. So, got just a steel rod here. You just crank this to loosen it. If you lift up on this slides in and out so you can put a piece in faster. If you need to cut on an angle, you can loosen this up and this table will turn so you can cut on an angle. So, we got our piece of steel in there. We can just push this in. Make sure it's straight, then we can just push it in, then we tighten it up with a crank, and it locks it down good in there. So make sure the guard is nice and free. If this guard is seized up or caught for any reason, it'll hit on the table and it won't let you push the saw down. So we have a trigger on here. Fully depress the trigger, and then push the saw down, and let the saw blade do all the work. Don't just force it down. Don't hit it hard down onto it. It could damage the blade. So nice and slow, let it do all the cutting. Make sure your work area is nice and clean of debris. If we have any rags or anything back behind there, or sawdust, anything like that, it could catch on fire. You'll see there's a lot of sparks and stuff go back there. We're just cutting this little piece so that probably won't catch on fire, but you'll see all the sparks going at it. Okay, so make sure everything's ready to go. Pull the trigger. Okay, you see we cut all the way through it there. There's usually always going to be kind of a burr on something when you cut it. You can take it to a grinder or take it to a file. Just clean it up a little bit. That way nobody gets cut on it. Plus it looks a lot nicer. See, we had our rag back there. That was just a small piece, so probably don't have any burn holes in it, but these do catch on fire fairly easy. So if that was laying back there and I was cutting multiple pieces or a big piece, it could cut right through it and catch that on fire. So always make sure there's no aerosols or anything nearby also that could bust with all the sparks that come off of that. Okay, next we have our drill press here. So using the drill press is kind of like using any of those hand drills over there, except it's more powerful, a little more dangerous. You definitely want to make sure you don't have any loose clothing or anything with these. If I had long sleeves on or something that could get caught in there, a tie or something, it wouldn't be good. I'll just set this here and see if we can get it to catch on us. Yep, see, just whips it around. If that was attached to me, my arm would be pulled into that right now. I wouldn't be able to stop this by hand. This one's pretty powerful. I'll show you guys a bigger one here in a minute, drill press that we have over in the other barn. This one here, this is actually an old drill press. This is probably 100 years old now. An old Buffalo Forge Company one. I just replaced the motor and stuff on it, but it's a great drill press. I really like it. So whenever we're using a drill press, we always want to make sure our piece of metal is attached to the table somehow. I have a vise here that I use, or make sure it's clamped to the table, either with a clamp that's built into it or a nice C-clamp holding it down. If it's not attached to it, let me run this in, I'll show you guys here. If the piece of metal catches it all, it could whip around on you. So you always want to make sure that it's attached. Don't try to hold it with your hand. Sometimes if it catches really bad, you're not strong enough to hold this back, not strong enough to stop the drill. So if this caught, okay, I'm going to let go of it here. You see it spun around on me. See if I get a little more action here. Okay, so remember, don't try this at home, but this is what not to do. See, it spins around right there. I wouldn't be able to stop that by hand. So always make sure it's clamped in there nicely and doesn't catch on you. Okay, so to save my drill press, I like to throw a little piece of wood in there in the bottom if I can. You can see it loosened up my bit there on me because it was a little off-centered there, a little oblong when it was whipping around there. Okay, so to put the bit in, this chuck is just like the other chuck there, except this one has a key that goes to it. So I snug my bit down in there. You take the key, you put in there, just acts as a gear. Just turns it around, make sure it's locked in there nicely. The drill bit I just put in there, it's in perfectly round. It has little flat spots on it. If you're using a drill bit like that, make sure the flat spots are lined up with the jaw. If it's off a little bit, it's not going to stay tight on you. But that style bit works a lot better. You don't get any slipping or anything when you're drilling through metal. Okay, so we'll clamp this down good in our vise here. This vise here is a milling vise. I can move it on the x-axis and on the y-axis. Works really good, especially for this drill press here at my house. This vise is probably about 60, 70 bucks. This is just a Harbor Freight one. Had it for a couple years. Works really good. So, okay, I line it up where I need it. We'll finish drilling out this hole here. Turn it on. Whenever we're drilling, we want some lubrication. Okay, so now we're ready to drill. We're going to take our RGS penetrating oil here, professional use only. This is actually a machining oil, it's not just a penetrating oil, so this is good for drilling and tapping. So we're all lined up here. We're going to give it a little shot of the oil. That way it's going to keep the drill bit cool. We don't want to heat up our drill bit. If we heat up our drill bit, it's going to dull it pretty quick. I just sharpened this one, so this one should be halfway decent. Okay, so I'm going to get it over to work where I want it. Turn it on. See, you got a little smoke from the oil coming off. Drilled right in down to the piece of wood. Okay, so that's our nice little drill press right there. Always make sure it's nice and clean, all the debris. Usually whenever I'm drilling a lot of holes before I start, and when I'm done, I'll vacuum everything up just so I don't have a big mess. As I was saying, I love this drill press. It has this nice little tray around the outside of it. Catches the stuff really nicely here. Okay, next, since we're right here, we'll just show you this little sliding compound miter saw. I know it's not something that you use too much in the truck shop, but usually, you know, it's a go-to tool if you're doing any sort of construction or anything. Most homeowners have something like this, or a circular saw. So with this, it's kind of like the chop saw, moves up and down, but this one also moves in and out. Biggest thing with this, remember, it's not forgiving at all. That's a saw blade in there. Keep your fingers away. If you have to hold a piece of wood or anything, keep your fingers back. Just use your little knuckles. That way, if it kicks, usually punch it instead of your fingers actually getting chopped off. So, you know, keep your fingers tucked back if you're holding something. Okay? So all we're going to do here is squeeze the trigger. You see the saw blade goes. I can go in and out with it. So I just put it to where I want to cut it at. And just go all the way down with it. Let off. Very simple. This is called a miter saw because it does all different angles. I could set it at whatever degree I want here. Say I wanted to cut something at 15 degrees. Take my piece of wood, same thing. So now we're at a 15-degree cut there. I could cut it all different angles, either this way or this way. So very handy for wood. You do quite a wide piece with it. Cut all the way through. You can start out here and go in, but sometimes it kicks the wood on you, so it's always better to come out with it if you can. But you can do it that way also. Okay, we're over at my dad's shop here. This is his drill press. This big old beast that's, over 100 years old. Made in USA. Big old thing here. I'll turn it on, you can watch it run. So this drill press here is back when men were men. This one you definitely don't want to try to hold the piece of metal on it. You want to make sure it's bolted down to the table good. If this one caught, your body wouldn't stop that piece of metal going around. There's so much torque and stuff with all this pulley reduction on it that it's unstoppable. Also, since we're talking about tool safety here, if you have any other spinning tools around, make sure you know how to fully use them before you start playing with them. This here's a metal lathe. It's a smaller one. We got a bigger one over here. There's even a bigger one over back. This here though, you definitely couldn't stop if you wanted to. So make sure you're fully trained in all this stuff before you play with anything.